Both Ducati and BMW have made it their mission to build the most powerful street fighter the world has ever seen. To do that, they've taken quite a bit from their superbikes and, with a few tweaks, carried those elements over to the street fighter in order to really make a splash. And as for who's done it best, well, you'll find out in just a moment. What we've got here from both sides is a very capable superbike to start with. The superbike category has always been the one that pushes the boundaries of technology. That's where the improvements are developed, tested and fine-tuned. And that same know-how is now being used in their spin-offs in the street fighters to bring those innovations across. Ducati and BMW follow a fairly similar path here, even if their overall concepts differ slightly. Each manufacturer brings a top-notch superbike to the table. For Ducati, that's the Panigale, which is also new for 2025. They've tried to carry that DNA over into a street fighter. But that's not as simple as one might think. You can't just strip off the fairing from a superbike, stick a tall handlebar on it and expect it to ride just as well. When it comes to the engine, sure, but especially in terms of rideability, things often take a serious hit. That upright riding position increases wind pressure on the rider and overall lift on the bike, which tends to create issues with riding dynamics. That's where the two brands go down slightly different roads. Ducati also starts with the Panigale as the base, but they've made a few adjustments. So it's not just about removing the fairing, they've also changed the basic geometry a bit. And that's key for a street fighter, as you need a bit more base stability in the chassis geometry simply because of the increased lift dynamics. Ducati achieves that by altering the steering head angle. For the street fighter, that angle is made flatter, which gives you a bit more front-end control. On top of that, the gear ratios have been shortened a bit, both the front and rear sprockets, which creates a longer wheelbase because with the same chain length, the swing arm extends slightly, or more accurately, the axle shifts further back. The swing arm itself stays the same, but that change results in a slightly more stable base geometry. And that's actually one of the biggest differences between the two bikes. For this comparison, we'll obviously be looking at the M1000R from BMW and not the S, simply because the M has 40 more horsepower than the S, and that just makes for a fairer match when comparing it to Ducati's Streetfighter V4. Just a quick note on the chassis again. As we said, Ducati has made a few changes compared to their superbike. BMW takes a slightly more conventional or straightforward approach. They mostly just remove the fairing and tweak the seating position a bit. And that brings us to one of the key differences between these two bikes. Ducati benefits massively from these changes. They've also made major adjustments to the chassis, especially when it comes to flexibility. The new frames are softer. Well, maybe not soft, but they're no longer as torsionally rigid. What that does is allow the chassis to absorb some of the bumps and movements that naturally occur, which helps calm the whole ride down a bit. BMW, on the other hand, takes a slightly different direction. It's got a very stiff chassis, which, without any additional modifications for the Street Fighter, naturally leads to a much more nervous ride. Especially at higher speeds, it's relatively difficult on the BMW to keep the bike stable in a straight line. With that kind of power, well over 200 horsepower, there's very little weight over the front wheel at speed. And you really notice that on the BMW. From around 180-200 kilometers an hour, it starts to feel a bit twitchy. You get movement, especially under full throttle, and it becomes noticeably harder to hold a precise line or to sit relaxed on the bike at high speed. In comparison, the Ducati Streetfighter V4 is incredibly stable. Even at high speeds, I've ridden it up to around 270-280 kilometers an hour. The bike stays rock solid and you get a really confident feeling. The wind turbulence is barely noticeable on the Ducati, even though the wind pressure itself is of course massive. On a naked bike at those kinds of speeds, you absolutely feel it. Not just in your upper body, but on the helmet too. But even your head stays impressively still on the Ducati because there's hardly any turbulence hitting you. Thanks to the way the front is designed, with that mask at the front, everything stays really comfortable, even for the rider, at higher speeds. And it's not just at high speed that the Ducati benefits from its stability. It also really shines on the brakes, especially when turning in, where you need a lot of front-end feel. The Ducati clearly has the upper hand. Because of that calm handling, You get a really precise sense of what's going on at the front tire. You can feel when it's getting close to the limit. With the BMW, that becomes a bit trickier. Under straight line braking, it's not that noticeable, but once you start to trail brake into a corner, that's where the Ducati really pulls ahead. So overall, when it comes to basic riding dynamics, the Ducati is significantly more stable than the BMW, and that's already a major advantage in favor of the Ducati. In terms of the engine, as we've already mentioned, both bikes are fairly close when it comes to peak power, but it has to be said that the BMW, with its engine from the S1000RR, really needs high revs to unlock its full potential. You're looking at 13,750 revs on the BMW to reach that peak output. With the Ducati, you get 214 horsepower a little earlier at around 13,500, although you still need a good amount of revs to get there. What really stands out is that the Ducati's engine builds up steadily from the lower rev range, and the transition from low to high is, let's say, smoother. There's a kind of step around 9,000 revs where the top end power really kicks in, but that transition on the Ducati is a bit more refined. It pulls more cleanly from lower down, partly thanks to the slightly larger displacement with 100 extra cubic centimeters compared to the BMW. On the BMW, that transition between the lower and upper revs feels a bit more aggressive. It needs to reach 9,000 revs before the engine really starts to deliver, and you do notice that disadvantage in displacement in a direct comparison, even though they've tried to compensate for it with the variable valve timing. But right at 9,000, there's that proper kick when the full power arrives, and that transition is definitely smoother on the Ducati. You get more linear acceleration through the rev range. On the BMW, things get very aggressive once you're over 9,000 and especially above 10,000 revs. And this is where the chassis comes into play again, because Ducati has a few more advantages here too. With its counter-rotating engine, unlike the BMW, Ducati benefits from the fact that the torque, that reactive force when the engine revs up and pushes against the frame, acts forward, not backwards like it does on the BMW. So this support moment from the engine on the BMW, it adds to the acceleration and makes the bike more prone to lifting the front even earlier. On the Ducati, because the engine spins in the opposite direction, the support moment pushes forward, which helps keep the front end down for longer. So particularly in terms of acceleration performance, Ducati has the edge here too. That translates to better drive off the line. The difference of 4 horsepower isn't really noticeable when it comes to outright engine performance, but the way the Ducati puts power down is noticeably better than the BMW. The BMW tends to go at it a bit more aggressively, and as a result, the front starts to lift a bit sooner. That's also due to the fact that Ducati puts more effort into fine-tuning the transition between Superbike and Streetfighter, placing more emphasis on chassis setup and stretching the wheelbase just a bit to get an advantage here. And while we're talking about chassis, we have to touch on suspension too. Ducati, especially in the S variant, and it comes in 2 versions, the Standard and the S, is equipped with Öhlins components, as we already know. Öhlins has now introduced the next evolution of their system. This is electronic suspension version 3.0. They've made further changes to the valves, increased the adjustment range a bit, and upgraded the software that calculates riding conditions, all of which delivers a major improvement overall. In our direct comparison, we were only able to ride the S version, meaning the one with the Öhlins suspension, so we haven't yet tested the standard suspension that's also available. But specifically looking at the Öhlins setup, it clearly outperforms what BMW is offering. BMW's M variant also comes with the DDC system, that's their electronic damping control, which also gives you a wide adjustment range, but it's not quite at the same performance level as what Öhlins brings to the table. On the racetrack, where suspension systems are really pushed to the limit, this difference becomes very clear. The Ducati allows you to get on the throttle really early and put down a lot of power without the bike getting unsettled in lean. Combined with the softer chassis and the well-tuned suspension, the overall performance is extremely high, and that results in faster lap times. The BMW struggles a bit more here. Even though they've learned a lot and have made big improvements, it's still a bit behind in this area. That doesn't mean the BMW is bad to ride, not at all, but in those finer details, when you try to get on the gas early, it tends to run a bit wide. And when grip starts to fade, it becomes harder to judge exactly how close you are to the limit. On the Ducati, you're just on safer ground, and that's where it really has the upper hand. Where both bikes are truly neck and neck, though, is in terms of electronics. When it comes to electronics, there's clearly been a huge amount of development over the past few years, and you can really feel that on both the BMW and the Ducati. Both bikes come equipped with very similar control systems. We've got all the rider aids you can think of on both sides, and I have to say the quality of the systems is really well executed across the board. There's very little to criticize here. Even when riding hard on the track with worn tires, everything still works brilliantly. That was especially noticeable on the BMW, where we weren't even using tires with the highest grip levels. But that gave us the opportunity to really push into the intervention zones of the traction control and test out the slide control built into the system. And I've got to say, that really impressed me. I'm still someone who's used to managing everything manually, but I decided to let the electronics take over completely, and it worked flawlessly on the BMW. The electronic systems are 100% reliable. I pushed them to the limit in different scenarios, maximum lean angle, various gears, and everything functioned perfectly. You can really trust the bike. Even the wheelie control, which used to be a bit crude in earlier generations, and something I often preferred to manage manually, now works really well. When the front lifts, it doesn't just kill the power abruptly. Instead, the system still translates it into usable drive, and BMW has done a great job here. But Ducati is right up there as well. They've also refined their system significantly. Behind the scenes, the software has seen a lot of improvements. Some of the algorithms even simulate sensor data, so the bike doesn't actually need to have every physical sensor on board. Instead, complex calculations estimate those values, which allows for incredibly smooth and effective interventions. These systems not only offer excellent safety and support for the rider, but still allow enough freedom during acceleration to set quick lap times. And I have to say, both brands are on a very similar level here. So in this category, it's definitely a draw. That said, Ducati does have one small extra trick up its sleeve that gives it a slight advantage over the BMW. With this new model, and you'll also find it on the current Panigale, which is where it originally came from, Ducati has implemented a combined braking system into the Streetfighter with a few slight adjustments. What this means is when you pull the front brake, you're not just braking the front wheel anymore. The system automatically applies braking force to the rear wheel as well. It's all managed through the ABS system, which links the two together. The goal here is to keep the bike more stable under heavy braking, especially because there's also braking force being applied at the rear. But the biggest benefit, in my opinion, comes when you're trail braking into a corner. That extra braking at the rear helps the bike roll tighter into the turn. On the Panigale, Ducati goes a step further. It actually keeps that rear brake pressure active even after you've completely released the lever. That part hasn't been carried over exactly to the Streetfighter because Ducati says the dynamics of a naked bike call for a slightly different approach. There are a few other factors here that might still be important. So yes, it's true that as soon as you let go of the brake, the rear braking force is cut. But as long as you're still on the brakes, there's active braking happening at the rear wheel too. And that really helps position and rotate the bike a bit more cleanly into the corner all the way up to the apex. It's another thing that gives you a bit more control, especially when you're pushing for fast lap times. In terms of braking systems, both bikes are operating at a similar level. Ducati, as usual, relies on Brembo components. They've also introduced the next development stage here. The calipers aren't completely new, but the existing system has been further refined. They're lighter now, and heat transfer to the outside has also been improved. BMW on the M model uses a very strong braking setup as well. Both systems work at an extremely high level. You can easily get the bike up onto the front wheel with just one finger on the lever, no need for major hand strength. Also, the bite point is crystal clear. Sometimes with ABS systems it can feel a bit vague, but that's not the case here. It's precise and easy to modulate. So you can honestly say it's a dead heat between the two in terms of braking performance. BMW and Ducati are both at the top of their game in this area with no real room for criticism. One more thing worth noting on the braking side is the ABS behavior. In the past, there were often noticeable differences in how the systems intervened, but now both are very closely matched. On both bikes, you can deactivate rear-wheel ABS, which is essential for achieving maximum braking performance on the racetrack or under heavy braking. If you leave it on, you always run into the issue that when the rear wheel lifts slightly, the front brake automatically eases off to maintain stability. That's great if you want maximum safety, of course. But if your aim is the best possible stopping power in the shortest time, then you need to disable that function at the rear. The system is also designed to give a bit of leeway on the racetrack, allowing you to pitch the bike slightly into the corner and set your line early. That's probably most interesting for the more experienced riders among you, but it's great to have that option. You can now control this very comfortably through the onboard electronics and deactivate it in stages. Just like Ducati's combined braking system, which can also be switched off, Ducati now offers 5 different ABS modes, and that includes control over this feature as well. So for anyone who doesn't want it, it can be disabled step by step. So overall, even in terms of ABS performance and intervention quality, it's fair to say it's a draw between the two bikes. But in the end, we also need to talk about the price, because performance is one thing, but how much does it all actually cost? And here, it's clear that BMW has the upper hand. We're talking about 28,000 euros for the BMW, at least in Austria. The Ducati Streetfighter V4 S, that's the one with the Öhlins suspension, comes in at just under 35,000 euros. So there's quite a significant difference between the two. As for which one is the better bike, well, that's always a matter of opinion. But one thing's for sure, Ducati has done the best job of carrying over that super sporty handling from their superbike into the Streetfighter format. They've used a number of clever tricks and tweaks to transform a superbike chassis into something that performs brilliantly as a Streetfighter. And that brings us to one of the most important factors, generating rider confidence through stability. That's one of the key things that helps you achieve fast lap times, but it also gives the rider a lot of trust in the bike. And that's not only important on the racetrack, but also on the road where you're riding on varying surface conditions. Combined with the excellent feel and performance of the Öhlins suspension, that just takes things up another notch. This is where BMW still struggles a bit. Thanks to the Superbike engine, BMW has a highly capable power plant, no question, but compared to the Ducati, it feels a little more aggressive at the top end. It delivers huge amounts of power, but the chassis doesn't quite manage to harness it in the same controlled way. And those are really the main advantages between the two bikes. Then there's the price difference, of course, and that's where everyone needs to make up their own mind. Is it worth it for you or not? Maybe drop us a comment down below. What do you think? Would you spend that much more money to be on the Ducati and get the extra performance that comes with it? Or would you say, no, what BMW offers is more than enough and 28,000 euros is exactly what I've got in my pocket? It's probably going to be a very personal decision. Let us know what you'd go for. I hope this quick comparison gave you a bit of useful insight if you're trying to decide which of these bikes might be the one for you in the future. That's it from me for now. See you in the next comparison test, of course, right here on our channel. And I'll just say cheers, take care, and see you next time.